This morning I am in Fort Worth talking with James E. Hambleton, who I first met some years back when we were both working law librarians in Washington, D.C. back in the 1970s, as I recall, Jim. Jim, you are now retired, and for many years, though, you were the executive director of the Law Library of Texas Wesleyan University, and later became the school's chief financial officer. You must have been keeping them out of bankruptcy court. That's what deans for finance tend to do, I think. I say that facetiously. It's not that that's about to happen, but you were also a professor of law at the school, which has now been succeeded or merged into or sold to or whatever Texas A&M University has taken over. So we are here being hosted, I guess, in the law library by Texas A&M as the new owners of this operation. So by way of introduction, let me sort of ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself as a human being, a real person. Tell us a little bit about your life, Jim, both now and when you were young, perhaps.
Well, I was an Army brat, so that explains a lot, my interest in travel, and lived mostly, when we lived abroad, mostly in the Far East. Spent 3 years in Okinawa, 3 years in Hawaii, and it's fun for me to tell my students that I lived on Hawaii before it was a state, when it was still a territory. Now, here in Texas, they think of Oklahoma was a territory in 1918. Well, of course, Hawaii only goes back to 1959, but it seems funny to say you lived in a territory of the United States.
Yeah, you could have been up in Alaska freezing to death, and that was a territory then, too.
Right. Hawaii was better. And, my dad was stationed there right after the war, and as a military policeman. So we traveled a bit, and then when I was in high school in Madison, Wisconsin, he was posted to the Far East again, to the Philippines, but we decided to stay so my sister and I could finish our high school education in Madison, which we did, visited in the summer, and traveled extensively throughout the Far East during that visit when I was a junior in high school. That was fun. Today, that travel gene seems to have worn off a bit on my kids. My daughter actually relocated to Heidelberg a couple of years ago and is living in Germany now, so we make some trips over there occasionally.
It's a nice part of the world.
Yeah.
I visited there actually quite recently, not Heidelberg, but we were in, briefly in Frankfurt in the airport on the way to Vienna, and once a little bit farther east.
Yeah, it's always good to be close to a big airport, and actually that's, I think, a really major attraction of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, because there are direct flights to almost everywhere, including Frankfurt, which is the closest airport to Heidelberg.
Well, before we start talking about you and your career as a law librarian and as some of the other things you've been over the years, could I ask you any hobbies or special passions or other pursuits? I mean, you and I are both retired. We're supposed to have new activities. Do you have anything?
Well,
like
actually, I'm still on the payroll for Texas A&M as a consultant for a building project.
That's the best kind of retirement, I think, to have.
Yeah, and then when I'm around the law school, people look at me and say, "Aren't you retired? Why aren't you lying on a beach somewhere?" And I go, "Well, it looks like I'm working, but it's hobby work." And the thing about retirement is you can spend your time how you want to, and if I want to spend it doing hobby work, that's what I enjoy. And I really enjoy building, planning, and I always have. It's been a lot of fun.
They certainly have some grand plans ahead for this law school. I mean, they're talking about a whole new building and just basically transformation to the model that Texas A&M as a major research university would presumably want to have.
Correct. It's gone from a model of kind of a first-generation law student kind of institution to, again, a major research institution. So a lot more resources. It's going to be a force in the future.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to watch that because you don't see it every day in our line of work.
No, especially this time where there seems to be a crunch in legal education.
Yeah, sort of more of a retrenchment by
Mhm.
some places. Yeah.
Not for A&M.
Good. Well, more power to them. Let's see what happens. I was just last week down in Houston talking to a number of our colleagues for this project, and had occasion to visit the University of Houston, which I worked there
Mm-hmm.
45 or so years ago at the law library. The place is just, it's a whole different kind of place. It's huge operation, all these fancy buildings and students all over the place. And it also had become just a state school a few years before I was there. And the net result has been they've done some wonderful looking things. And, you know, the Texas Wesleyan is now going to have some of this experience being part of Texas A&M in the state system.
Mm-hmm.
At least for as long as the state has money. I mean, the price of oil keeps going down, and I know you're sort of dependent on that here.
I was going to say some of the development is dependent on the price of oil. So.
Yeah, well, that's true. Well, hopefully they'll be able to develop. I'm not sure I want to help pay for it at the pump every time I fill up, but we'll see. Well, let's talk about you now as a librarian and so on, and professor. I start out with asking you about your academic background. I know you have 3 degrees. Can you tell us what they are and where you got them?
Yeah, my first degree actually is from Middlebury College in Middlebury, Vermont, and been interested in languages and actually the way languages are organized, linguistics, and so at Middlebury I majored in Russian because this was the late 60s and Russian was in vogue as a language to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I'd actually taken 4 years of Latin in high school, which I'm not sure there are too many high schools that offer 4 years of Latin anymore, but it was a great background for
There were a lot of them when I was a kid too. I mean,
Yeah.
we're contemporaries. And I had 2 years, and they wanted me to take 2 more, but I chickened out.
opted out.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah. But it's a great background for all the Romance languages, including Russian. A lot of Russian words come from either the French or from the German. So, majored in languages. But while I was in Middlebury, about my junior year, my parents were still in Wisconsin, and I had a great aunt who lived in New York City, and she was concerned about my future. What was I going to do with a liberal arts degree, especially in Russian? And so when I was visiting one Thanksgiving, she actually set up a 2 or 3 day battery of tests at Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken. So I trooped over there and took all these tests.
Being a dutiful nephew.
Yeah, all these, a battery of psychological, occupational interest tests. And in the exit interview, they came up with, here are 3 professions you really should seriously consider. College professor, and I go, well, I'm majoring in Russian. I could do that in Russian. Computer programmer, and this is in the late 60s. I'm not sure what a computer programmer is.
Those great big rooms full of things with big open reel tapes in those days.
That's right, a little bit of programming. Yeah. And the third was librarian. And I'm going, okay, I don't see how these really fit together. So I'm going to start with college professor. So after graduation with my BA in Russian, I decided to apply to graduate school in Russian at different institutions, and was accepted at the University of Michigan and started the program in Russian, but realized after about a semester or so that it's not really what I wanted to do. I didn't really want to end up working in a college teaching Russian or as a Russian language scholar. I wasn't really interested in research in that particular area. So I quickly looked back and said, okay, let's tick off college professor. How about librarian? I had no idea. And so went over to the library school at Michigan, which has got a relatively decent reputation, and talked to the folks over there, and they said, you could transfer to the library school and actually carry over your credits you've already earned in Russian as cognate courses. And I said, okay, that sounds good. And so as I started the School of Library, then it was the School of Library and Information Science, now it's the School of Information at the University of Michigan, realized it was really an interesting profession, and then, or interesting degree, and I really enjoyed the work. And so I decided to when I graduated, to look for a library job. I had a lot of friends in Boston since I'd been in the Northeast, so I thought, okay, there are like 35 schools and universities in Boston. why don't I try to get a job in Boston? So I drove my car from Michigan to Boston, just started pulling out the yellow pages, which there were yellow pages then.
That's right, telephone books.
Telephone book,
Yeah.
and started under colleges and universities, started cold calling, because I thought I wanted to be an academic librarian. So I didn't want to be a school librarian or any other type. I thought, okay, I've got at least not teaching in college, but I could be a librarian in a college or university. And from that, I got 2 or 3 interviews and ended up taking a job in a law library, Suffolk University Law Library. Not necessarily interested in law libraries specifically, but just the academic setting. So started that job and really enjoyed it. I was actually doing cataloging and reference, which is an odd combination. I had a stack of books at the reference desk and would catalog.
Oh, it's a fairly small place.
Yeah.
Everyone had to sort of pitch in.
Yeah, that I would do the classification, original classification, as I was doing reference.
Yeah.
Realized that actually administration looked like fun in a law library setting, but to do that I needed a law degree. Didn't want to quit and go to law school full time because I really didn't have an intention to practice going in. I thought, well, okay, if I end up number 1 in the class, I'll reconsider that option. But decided to apply to law schools in Washington, D.C., because Washington had all these night programs. I wanted to go part-time, work full-time in a library during the day to continue to get library experience, but at the same time, and kind of self-fund my education. It was really inexpensive back then. So started, was accepted at George Washington, I think at American, and waitlisted at Georgetown, and I decided to go to GW and enrolled there as a night law student.
Pretty good law school. I hate to fess up and admit because they were sort of across town from where I was in America.
Yeah,
Can't criticize your choice.
Yeah, that was fun because I realized getting into law school was going to be harder than probably getting a library job.
Yeah.
Because at that point in time there was a real shortage of librarians.
And tons of jobs in libraries, law libraries in D.C.
Yeah. And so ended up almost immediately getting a job as kind of in a smaller law firm, getting a job as a librarian, and that was a firm that was in transition. They didn't really understand what a librarian can do, and the librarian also was the person at the switchboard during lunch, and they realized that was kind of weird.
Switchboard? Our new colleagues will have no inkling of what that is.
Well, basically a receptionist.
Yeah.
And
phone would ring, you'd answer it. And
exactly, and then
plug in or route the
route the call to a different to the extension that was called. You couldn't direct dial extensions, basically.
Yeah.
And so, this is before private branch exchanges, PBXs, right? So basically, we went ahead and they realized it was kind of funny to have a guy at the reception desk because this was, again, in the late 60s, and that just was a position for a woman.
It was not the proper gender for that type of work. In those days, that was important to a lot of people.
It was, again, for law firms, the impression that they went ahead and gave. And so left that firm, went to a larger firm, and worked at Arnold and Porter in D.C. as a law librarian there. Yeah, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I remember
people that worked with you or followed you that were became leaders in our profession too.
Yeah, A&P was a great place to work. I really enjoyed it. Realized though again, going part-time to law school, 4 years is a long slog.
3 years is pretty long too when you're going through it, but you're right, 4 years is even longer.
Yeah, so what I decided to do is last year to finish up, so I quit my A&P job and actually started working for Me Data, teaching Lexis in DC, and enjoyed teaching, realized I enjoyed that, and was able to finish up actually my law degree in 3 years. If you count the last summer, I graduated in August of 3 years after I started in the August 3 years before that.
Well, you were pretty early in the days of Lexis and later Westlaw. I mean, if you're working for that company, Me Data,
this is the
Lexis at that time, you must have been on the cutting edge of a lot of aspects of teaching that kind of research technology and
Yeah.
techniques.
I did a lot of actually writing about technology in that area. Again, this is kind of looping in the third branch of what they told me in college that would be a good profession is computer technology. So
You know, you are nibbling around the edges of all of those sorts of things. Yeah.
librarian, academic librarian, and technology. And I really enjoyed working with the computers, and I was able to finish my law degree. And it was interesting. Then I was recruited by Roy Mirsky to
I saw that in your background.
to join.
Put in some time at the Tarleton Law Library.
At the Tarleton Law Library.
I
Spent 3 years there, and then was hired to replace Marion Boner, who was the original director at the Texas State Law Library, which had been created in 1971.
Yeah.
And worked there for 6 or 7 years, and then was recruited by a law firm in Dallas to head up their records center, their library, and their computer technology. So again, kind of looping that together. The common thread through all of this is organizational structure. And I finally realized that after having worked in each area. Obviously, in a library, you're organizing information. In a computer, in computer technology, you're using computers actually just as another filtering or another tool to organize information. And then the teaching, you've got to teach people how to use it most effectively.
Again, organizing information for the learners.
Yeah, just a different set of tools. And now we're going into a completely different set of tools. It's interesting. I've seen the evolution, originally just having computers. When I started working for Lexus as a trainer in DC in the mid-'70s, there was no Westlaw. And then Westlaw came along in the early 1980s, and we had that at the State Law Library. I worked there 81 to 87. And then when I moved to the law firm, the big computer presence in law firms was Wang Computer.
Oh, I remember the so-called word processors.
Exactly, word processor, and then
secretaries used them.
Right.
To write documents.
Right, but then they were also ending up on associates' desks for research.
Oh.
Yeah, back then. That was Haynes and Boone in Dallas. Haynes and Boone was a very progressive firm in terms of technology, and they wanted to spread technology around. So that's kind of, worked for Haynes and Boone, which was great, except this is the Texas economy we were talking earlier about oil and gas and what happens when it goes down. Well, after 3 years there, we had the first bust in Texas. And it was the savings and loan crisis where North Carolina National Bank, or NCNB, or now Bank of America, took over a lot of Texas banks. There was a lot of consolidation, and the firm had to consolidate. So basically, I was laid off then, which was a little bit of a shock.
Scary too, I imagine.
Yeah, a little bit scary. Jim Heller says, I'm the most qualified librarian he knows who got fired, or I'm going, no, I was laid off. And enjoyed my time in DC and working for the firm, in Dallas. But it's interesting because I was working in a firm, then in the court library, and then a firm, and then right when I was laid off from the firm, looking around what to do, there was this brand new law school, Dallas-Fort Worth School of Law, and was recruited by Frank Elliott, the dean of the school, to go ahead and work for him. And I was not real sure of whether this was going to be a successful project. So I went ahead and said, I'll consult. I'll help development of the library for ABA standards, and having worked in academic libraries actually my entire career, in the sense that when I worked at Arnold and Porter, I was at the GW Law Library quite frequently doing research for them and looking for information, which reminds me of a story Jim Heller likes to tell, that it was his first day as a reference librarian there, and I was in the stacks looking for the index to the
That's right.
Federal Register.
There. That's
yeah,
right.
yeah, And I couldn't find it on the shelf, and Jim, being his first day at work, wanted to impress all the patrons, and I looked like a professional patron, so he asked if he could help, and I said, I'm looking for the index to the Federal Register, and he looked at me and said, I don't think there is one. And I looked at him and I said, who are you? And he said he was a new reference librarian, and I assured him there was an index, and we located it, but it was kind of fun. And again, it's an example of librarians helping each other. That was kind of fun, especially in the academic law library sector. And then ended up back at Dallas-Fort Worth School of Law, and I've actually been working for the same School of Law under 3 different names. It was Dallas-Fort Worth School of Law, Texas Wesleyan School of Law, and now Texas A&M School of Law.
Right.
Same basic institution with different brands, just like the banks have the same banking account in what used to be Interfirst Bank in Dallas, then it was North Carolina National Bank, then it was NCNB, and now it's Bank of America.
Before we talk a little more about Texas A&M, I want to sort of step back a notch. You worked with in 2 libraries in Austin that I've always had a lot of respect for. One was, of course, the University of Texas Tarleton Law Library under Roy Mirsky, who was, well known in our field in all the proper ways as a real leader and mentor to a lot of law librarians, and so you must have picked up a few things through that experience of some value. But Marion Boner had started off there as his reference librarian and maybe number 2 in the structure. And when the new Texas Law Library was formed, she moved over there and headed it up. You were her successor.
That's correct.
Now, the question I have is, did you have any opportunity to get to know either of these people, Roy or Marion particularly?
Yeah, actually, I'd known Roy professionally through, very active in the American Association of Law Libraries, so I met him at different meetings, because I'd been in the profession for a while since when I got there. And learned the best way to work with Roy is you just listen, and you listen for the content, not the delivery, because his delivery could sometimes be a little bit loud or harsh.
Yeah.
And if you made a mistake, he would tell you about it, and you just fixed it. And if you did that, it was fine. And also, he was the director of the law library, so he didn't want to do anything without letting him know ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And when I started work there in September of 1978, another professional librarian started work there, and we fell in love, and she became my wife. Oh. And we thought, okay, how are we going to announce this, break the news to Roy? And we decided to let him break the news to everybody. Uh-huh. So we didn't tell anybody in the law library. We did it secretly, and very professional work. If you saw us interacting, you would think we just met. I mean, there was nothing untoward going on in terms of
the normal relationship between colleagues.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
so we told Roy, and he said, you handle the announcement, do it any way you want to. And he said, okay, let's do it during spring break when there won't be many law students around. We'll gather the staff together, and I'll tell them you're engaged to be married. And he did that, and it was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people were really surprised, and somebody said, gee, I didn't even know they'd been introduced. It's like, so.
You guys did behave yourselves properly.
We did. We worked in different parts of the library. My wife was in charge of moving the library into a new building, and I was busy with reference. So we really didn't cross paths too much during the workday.
Well, it was a pretty good-sized operation.
Yeah.
The library.
Yeah.
And were you there when they got, I guess it's the current building, or was it an interim before that?
Well, this was the addition. This is the building that they moved into, the library moved into, and then they built, again, like every law school, every institution with a law school, they've expanded that. They've added a couple more buildings. But the library really is the building that we moved into in 1981.
Yeah. I remember before that it was up in the old Towns building, or what it was called. And it was, it was a much smaller
Yeah. My wife was in charge of moving the entire collection from the town's building to the new building,
Well,
which
that
was
was a
adjacent.
sizable
It
operation
was.
in those days. That
It
must have been a
was.
very significant piece of work.
It was.
Yeah,
It was.
getting that done and getting it done well.
Yeah, and she retired right after that. She left work because we had married and she was pregnant with our first child.
Ah.
So it was another good excuse to tell you. Roy wasn't too offended by that.
Yeah. Roy was an interesting person. I've heard from many people who worked for him that sure he had a reputation being sort of rough and gruff, but he really looked out for people too.
He really did, and he was very kind. Especially, he obviously he knew Marion Boner, and my wife actually had worked for Marion Boner at the State Law Library a few years before. So I think Roy had a lot of respect for Marion, a lot of respect for my wife as well.
Yeah.
And so again, if you acted professionally, you were fine.
Yeah. Well, Marion was, I don't know if I'd call her a protege of Roy. Probably not, because she was there, I think, before he was, and very well established as a law librarian. Did you have any real opportunity to know her at all?
Just socially,
Yeah.
just a delightful person. I know my wife was very fond of her.
Yeah, she was a really super person, I thought.
But we never really worked together. I just
Okay.
succeeded her in the
Good.
job, yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, she was not long with us after that era.
Mhm.
She passed away at some point fairly early on at
Yes.
that point. Yeah. Well, let's sort of move back to a little more of your contemporary life here at Texas Wesleyan and now Texas A&M as a consultant. You want to talk a little more about that part of your what you've been involved in, some of your, including your little sidestep into the budgeting world.
Into the budgeting
law
world.
school.
Well, initially, I think I've always had an interest in buildings, and obviously for law schools, the library's been a large chunk of the space of any law school building.
Very much.
Very much. So law librarians are always involved, actually looking at contemporary buildings. A lot of law librarians are involved in the planning process or on the building committee for any new law school building. So after joining Texas Wesleyan in 1990, I guess, we had a 3-year lease on the building, and then the landlord decided that we had a 3-year option, that we could only exercise 1 year of the option, then we had to be out.
Oh. So
So we had to look for a new building, and located the current building we were in 1995, and we had only a year to plan a complete retrofit of the building and then move at that time into the new building. So worked with the architect, the representative of the university for the building process, knew a lot about the process, but not about law schools and not about programming the space, which activities should take up what space, especially the law library since it was so big. So we went ahead and designed the space, again, always through the filter of the ABA standards. Realized the building we had is a 3-story building, but the upper floor was leased to the IRS and they didn't want to leave. So we had 2 floors, we were short of space. There was no way we could fit an accredited law school in the space unless we made a pretty good argument. And the argument was we were short with the law library. It was only about 14,000 square feet. We needed probably twice that. So we went ahead and we planned for compact shelving. Again, it's a brand new law school. We told the ABA, look, we're growing. We have everything we need, kind of the core collection. At this point, again, things are getting online. There was a lot more available research sources and primary materials available online with Lexis and Westlaw. They had really matured by this point. And so we said, as soon as we get the 3rd floor, which the IRS had a lease that was going to run out, we'll go ahead and expand, and we'll put the library on the 3rd floor, which is like 30,000 square feet, and just reconfigure the other space. This turned out to be a blessing in disguise, though, because by the time, 6 years later, that the IRS finally vacated in 1995, we realized that the law library with electronic technology didn't need the same square footage, or it could be reconfigured into study rooms and collaborative space in that kind of area. So rather than put the library on the third floor, we left it where it was in the lower level with compact shelving and expanded it to the entire lower level and added a lot more compact shelving.
So you basically grew from within, literally, on this floor then.
And then the top floor, the third floor, was turned into classrooms. So we kind of flipped. The lower level had been the library and large classrooms. So we moved the large classrooms upstairs and left the library down there instead of putting the library upstairs and putting more classrooms at the lower level.
Sort of on the cutting edge of, as the evolution began to begin to focus more on digital technology and what can be available that way.
Right. In the mid-'90s is when a lot of it happened. I remember, I think the first CD-ROM for Westlaw was out like in 1992 or something. And again, the internet, 1992, 93, a very early adopter of the internet too for research, that kind of thing. The World Wide Web more specifically.
Yeah, that all came along about that time.
Yeah, I was doing some consulting for major law firms about what is this thing, the World Wide Web? How would it be useful to a law firm? And introducing concepts like a little bit of virtual reality where they could look at things, look at the research sources, try to go ahead and find information on companies and officers. It really was a kind of an exciting time because the internet, people realized kind of what it was, but couldn't figure out how it would be useful to them, just like early on, how one could do research online with word searching.
A little bit like today, how could we live without our smartphones and so on, and yet they've only been around a few years. And
exactly.
Who needed all this technology? All you want to do is talk on the phone. Well, I don't think anybody really talks on them much anymore. They're always texting and sending messages and looking at apps and finding out all sorts of stuff. And the same thing in the when the World Wide Web came along. What could this do? But boy, try and live without it now.
Yeah, it's amazing, and actually it's interesting to figure out the relationship between the two, digital technology. As I mentioned, my daughter lives in Heidelberg, and there was a really interesting article in the Dallas Morning News, but I couldn't find it digitally online in just the regular, kind of the presentation you see of just text. But they have an e-paper, and when you pull up the e-paper, it's a reproduction of the paper copy. I found the paper copy. The article I wanted was on page 2 of the main section. Could take that, and then they have this really nifty thing. I discovered this yesterday, where you can actually ask for a download, not just a PDF of the entire page, isn't that helpful, but a PDF of the article, which crops it from the page. So it was the top half, so it had all the headline, all the pictures embedded and everything.
So it's all sort of in one spot, too.
Yeah,
you don't have to hunt around for the later page where they put the rest of the article.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, I didn't have an article like that, but it did crop all the ads out at the bottom of the page.
Yeah. Well, I get the Washington Post on my Kindle. It isn't quite that format, but it doesn't have any of the ads.
Yeah.
I don't know if they even get it anymore with the newspaper business, but I'm sure they do.
Yeah. Well, the hard copy has more ads. The electronic copy always has kind of an ad down the right-hand column, like in the New York Times and other.
That's how it works.
Yeah. They're going to get you.
Well, they have to make some sort of profit on the thing, I'm sure. Understandably, I mean, they are businesses and they wouldn't be able to keep going without it, so can't complain too much. Well, it sounds like you've been involved in some interesting things. Now, at one point you moved out of the library.
Okay, yeah, getting back to your original question.
And into the other seat.
Right. Worked essentially as the library director, and then in about 2000, there was an issue with the university, and not really an issue, but since, again, the library was a huge chunk of the budgets, was working with the dean on the general budget, the overall budget, and he decided to go ahead, and he needed more full-time work on the budget, so he offered me the position, the idea of moving out of the library and doing the budgeting full-time. And so worked with the different departments, and again, it kind of goes with the space too, working with the departments on the space they need for the building, because this is after the renovations, and also working with the budgets and with the personnel. With Texas Wesleyan, we were a pretty lean, totally tuition-driven school.
Uh-huh.
So the budget was really, it was really important to make sure the budget stretched to cover all the needs.
Mm-hmm.
As the university kept telling me, you can only spend a Wesleyan dollar once. So, and they didn't want to borrow too much. So,
Well, you can't quibble with that. It's a sound policy, I think.
Yeah. But in that position, moved out of the library for my administrative job, moved to the budgeting as my administrative job, but I was still teaching. So I was still teaching a course. So I was kind of faculty half-time and budget guy half-time versus half-time library, half-time professors. So.
Well, I should say it was sort of, in some ways, the same kind of thing as being the director of the library, the executive director, because you were dealing with the budgets and had probably colleagues to do with some of the other nitty-gritty of the library.
Yeah, budget and personnel, and I think most librarians, they end up actually active in the budget process because of that, and as I said, they end up active in the building too, because the building, really the core organizing principle of law schools is a library, whether it be spread over several floors or in one place.
And you said real early on in our conversation that as a librarian, you knew how to organize information. Well, that's what you're still doing.
Yeah, organizing financial information versus
a version and critical to the survivability of the institution to keep the budgets under proper control and management.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you also have been a professor, and you've taught over the years, and you want to talk a little bit about some of that aspect of your life.
Yeah, actually, as I said, I started my first teaching was really with Me Data in DC in the 70s, just teaching people how to use electronic technology, and learned there that it was real important to try to communicate the most important facts up front, because you only have like one chance with these people in training to get the concepts across. And was teaching research as part of the research and writing program, and then the program was redeveloped, and research was melded into the writing program. Mm-hmm. So I was a research and writing professor, and I was teaching 2 sections of that, and enjoyed that a lot. And we were a night institution as well, so I was teaching one day section and one night section, and I really enjoyed the night students, and then doing the budget as well. And early on, again, the library and teaching research and writing. Most of my scholarship has been in kind of the research and writing area. When I was at the State Law Library, I was really interested in the legal history of Texas, so did a lot of work on examining the full development of Texas law, really, from the Republic on, and how different concepts were carried forward. Texas is interesting because, as you know, it has community property, and the property is based on Spanish law, las siete partidas, and so some of that's still carried forward. And Texas is very interesting because in some ways it's very progressive, and in some ways it's not. And it's very progressive in community property and women's rights that way. But then the miscegenation laws really weren't fully repealed until 1971. So
it's conservative in other ways, progressive in one aspect, and maybe a little slower in the others.
Yeah. So wrote a lot of that, and published in the 80s, published about 20 or 30 articles in the Texas Bar Journal, dealing with different aspects, with a co-author in Houston, on different aspects of Texas research, Texas law, the Semicolon Court, which is a famous Texas law story, and really enjoyed that. But then as things got busier over the last 5 or 8 years, that's kind of fallen off a little bit. I was looking forward to doing some more writing in retirement, but I have yet to be able to schedule that time.
Too many other irons in the fire, and you know, as you say, your life's your own in a new way now. And makes have some fun with try new things or do whatever you want to do. Including writing, if that's
including writing. I think I'm more interested in doing the research and finding the answer rather than writing it down after I find the answer. Actually, that's what I enjoy doing, and I enjoy the building a lot, planning the building, and I'm involved in that. I have a meeting later this afternoon to go over some floor plans with how they're reconfiguring this building before we finish or before we build a new building.
Sounds like you're having fun as a consultant right now.
Yeah, that is fun.
Yeah, that is great. Now, you have been active professionally. You've been president of the Southwestern Association of Law Librarians, and you served a term on AELL's executive board.
That's
you
correct.
Want to talk a little bit about those and perhaps some of your other professional activities?
Yeah, I tried to be active in all of the library associations. I was also, I think at one point, president of the Dallas Association of Law Libraries, and then Southwestern Association of Law Libraries, and the executive board of the American Association of Law Libraries. In terms of the bar, I was active with technology. At one point in time, I was director, or chair, I guess is the term, chair of the Texas State Bar section on computers and technology, and was active in that section for a few years, which I enjoyed.
It sounds like you've had a lot of experiences there, and probably networked and met people. I think they call it networking now. In the old days, you got to know people.
Yeah, and that was actually the non-library or non-law library folks. That was the practitioners, working with them on the use of technology, again, in the practice of law. And that was interesting. So it all comes back to that junior year 2 days that my great aunt funded about finding out what you want to do when you grow up. And
helping you out. I imagine not many young people would put up with that or want to put up with that kind of intervention on their lives.
Well, I was amenable because I wasn't sure, and again, just thinking about how the three ideas intersected: computers, academic teaching, and librarianship interacted.
You did sort of figure out how to put it all together in your own career, all three of those areas.
Yeah. So it's been a wild ride sometimes, but
well, it has. It's been fun and it's been interesting, I'm sure. That brings me to sort of the last item I wanted to talk about with you. You are one of these people who's seen a lot of change in our field. You've been part of it. You've been part of it recently with a new school, a new library. You were thrust into making trade-offs and choices that seem to be more commonly being made now by more established places. But it goes back to when you were first working with Made Data as a Lexis instructor around town. You've seen the whole development of this whole alternative to the traditional book-filled libraries of the past. Do you have any thoughts you want to share about that, or any predictions of where you think things may or may not be headed in the short term? I know if we think beyond the very short term, we're even more likely to get it wrong, but you want to try that?
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about it. I mean, librarians have always been intermediaries between the information and the patron. And even early on with Lexis and Westlaw with electronic communication, it was a matter of helping people do it or doing it for them. Now, though, everybody is getting so skilled, really, at least they think they're skilled, in doing the searching. The question is, what is the role for the librarian? And I think it's still a filtering role, indicating what databases, what sources could be consulted all the way back to reference 101 in library school. Okay, here's the question, would you find it in an encyclopedia, dictionary, wherever? Now the question is, here's what I need. I know how to do the searching. Where should I go? Because if you just Google something, you have no idea of the authenticity. Again, as lawyers, we look for authority.
Mm-hmm.
You have no idea of the authority. And citation is so important, obviously, to lawyers,
Yeah.
that we somehow have to communicate to students that even though you get stuff from a Google search, what's its authority? Where did it come from? To shorten your time, what are the sources with authority that you should be looking at, and how to conduct the most effective kind of searches in those particular sources. So we're still intermediaries, though we're a little bit removed now, but we still have to filter for our patrons. Otherwise, it's like drinking from a fire hose is the common
Yes.
Yeah, we have to show
Sure,
them.
it's water, but just lots of luck.
Yeah, we need to go ahead and make sure they're being effective and efficient with their time.
I would think, given the huge and expanding universe of information that one can access, that would be the challenge for our colleagues in the profession. How do you manage that in a sensible way that people can really take advantage of all this stuff?
I think, again, it goes back to almost the reference interview. What do you really need? What piece of information, or what kind of, do you need an overview? Do you need something akin to what we can find in a jurisprudence, Texas jurisprudence, an encyclopedia, a legal encyclopedia, versus some detailed information, a form for a name change. In the old days, you'd go ahead and filter that and say, okay, you go to this book or that book. Now it's, okay, if you Google search, you'll pull all of this information out, but which should you look at? Which is going to give you the information in the format you want it in and to the depth you want it in? Because sometimes you're just looking for, something more general than specific. Sometimes you want a specific form. If you want a name change form, I don't think you're going to find it quickly if you type change of name in Texas.
Well, I imagine Google would return all sorts of hits on that.
All sorts of hits, but
Maybe
which one?
thousands and thousands.
Yeah, my point. So which one is going to be most effective to look at first?
Unless
If
you
you
have
could-
the next 300 years to check them all out and find it yourself.
Yeah, by narrowing the database, narrowing the source, the kinds of source.
Yeah.
So I think the means of providing help and providing information have changed, obviously, electronic versus book, but the same set of skills is still required.
Well, that sounds somewhat bullish on the future, I think is what you're saying. For people in the line of work you and I were in for all those years, and sort of still dabble around it a little bit. Yeah. Well, we're nearing the end of today's conversation, Jim. And it's customary for me to ask if there's anything that we've not talked about that you would like to bring up.
One thing I forgot about retirement. Yeah, I do work hobby work, I should say, but I do have some personal interests as well. I don't want to leave the impression I'm only hanging around the law school, but I enjoy read a lot of newspapers. We get 2 copies of newspapers at home, and realized about 15 years ago I needed a little more physical activity, so I started running.
Yeah.
So I'm
You
still
look nice and trim.
Yeah.
Quite unlike some people in this room. I'm the only other one.
Yeah, I run 10Ks, 15Ks, and half marathons. So getting ready for the half marathon season. The problem in Texas is you can't run during the summer, which starts in June.
It
Isn't
tended to be a little humid and hot here.
Yeah. So we're just entering the half marathon season. I warmed up with a 10-mile run last Sunday, but I enjoy that as well.
Well, I don't know about the rest of your late fall and as you move into winter weather up here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but it's certainly been delightful today. It's sunny, bright, no humidity, not super hot, but not really cold.
Yeah, it's really, it's
very nice.
It's nice. It's never really too cold to run in Texas.
Yeah.
Occasionally it will snow, and maybe that day you don't run, but
Yeah.
otherwise.
Or use an indoor track at the gym or something.
Yeah, I like to run in 35-degree weather. It's fine. Yeah.
Why not?
Just put a hat on and gloves, and you're good to go.
I mean, you're producing your own heat to keep yourself warm with the exercise. Why not?
Yeah.
Well, maybe on that, I should thank you, James Hambleton, for talking to us today for the oral history. And in thanking you, I'm doing it not just on my own behalf, because I get the pleasure of being here and chatting with you and getting to do the travel and so on, but also on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank Kodak, and Dick Spinelli, of course, our colleagues with whom I have the privilege of working to put together this history of our profession and what we, during our collective working lives, have done to justify our earning a living from it. So it's been really fascinating to talk to you today. I thank you for being part of this.
Thank you.